let's just start working on another page in our site. So if we do a new post, let's get all of this translating, and we can kind of encounter maybe some different challenges along the way, and talk about kind of how we can work on those. So I'm going to go back and open up my code editor, and I'll go into, let's just close the locales over here because we kind of know what's in there by now. Let's open up our resources and our custom elements and our postform.html and our postform.js. And okay, so let's talk about translating some of the stuff here. So we can do some of this really pretty easily. We can use the same methodology here, except we know this is postform and this is title. We can take that and we can use that same binding for body, and we can use that same binding for add tag. We don't exactly know how to handle the title quite yet, which is dynamic and depends on whether we're creating or editing. So we'll hold off on that for now. Also, we know we have this placeholder with your post title that we are translating, but we don't also know how to handle that necessarily. So yeah, we'll hold off on that as well. So let's just give that a save, go back to our application, log in as Jane Doe, and we can say, let's go to new post and translate to French. Yeah, titre, continue, add tag here, ajouter marque. So yeah, we're looking pretty good. We have some things to work out. We've got to figure out how to do this create post, both in the header and the button. We've got to figure out how to do this placeholder text of your post title. And we've also got to figure out how to do this validation as well. I propose that we take a look at the placeholder text here, as I believe it's probably the easiest to do. When you need to translate something that's not just the inner HTML of an element, it's actually pretty darn simple to do. What you can do is add your translation custom attribute, and then all you have to say is that, well, I don't want to do the inner HTML, I actually want to do the placeholder here, and then I can say use post form and the title placeholder. Yeah, and that's all we have to do. So I've basically just told the Internationalization plugin that, hey, make sure you use this in the placeholder rather than doing it kind of conventionally in the inner HTML. Let's go back to our application, give that a shot. New post, and let's click our French translation. And yeah, votre titre d'article, and that is translated just fine. So yeah, that was pretty simple. Okay, so what about this create post? Or if I go back to home and I'm currently logged in as Jane Doe, if I view my second post and click edit post, well, what about edit post here? So we know if we go back to our app, or if we go back to our code and go into our locales, well, we've already created the translation for both edit post and create post, both in English and French. So how do we access those? Well, so what I propose we do is we first open our post subdirectory and kind of look at how this title is populating in the first place. If we go to our edit.js, well, when we go down to the bottom of our activate lifecycle hook, we say this.title is edit post. Well, what if instead of using the actual text here, what if we just say edit post? So the title is going to be edit post, and this is actually going to be the property of, if we go back into our postform.json in our locales, it's going to be the property, and this P should be capitalized, that's going to correspond to what actually needs to be looked up. So yeah, I think we can make that work. Let's go back to edit.js and make sure the casing is correct here. And then I'll also go to create.js, and again in the attached lifecycle hook, instead of saying create posts, let's get rid of that. The title that we're going to bind is going to be create post. Okay, so if we go back into our application, log in again, hit new post. Okay, so it looks pretty ugly right now, create post, and again in the button, but we will actually use this now as a variable to grab the correct information from our translations. So let's close our create.js and our edit.js. In our post form here, instead of saying that this is going to be the title, I don't know, we could just have we could have some generic thing there, but we can use our t attribute here, and we can say that, well, we know our translation is going to be coming from post form, but we'll use a template literal here and just say we'll use that title property that's passed to know exactly which object property from our JSON file that we actually want. So let's additionally do that down here in our button. Add it here. And maybe I'll just give this a generic submit title. Save that. So now what's going to happen is the title is, this is either going to be create post or it's going to be edit post. And depending on what this variable is, it's going to bring over the correct translation. Let's go back into our app and log in as Jane Doe, hit new post. Okay, so create post, that's starting to look good again. But if I change to French, créer article, and yeah, it's both in our header and in our button. So that is exactly what we wanted to happen. Awesome. So let's talk about these validation messages. There's a few things we can do to translate those to French. What I'm going to do is a fairly simple way of kind of integrating both our internationalization plugin with the event aggregator to make sure these are up to date. So first, what I'd like to do is let's just make sure that we create some translations that would correspond to what these validation messages should actually be. So if I go back to my code, I'm going to go to post form, both in my English and French translations, and I will create another property here that is maybe a required field. This is just an example, so it might be smarter to kind of have an error and then something like required, and kind of list out all of your error messages. But just because this is kind of a small example, I'm going to use required field, and that should be sufficient. And so, well, what's going to be in here? We want to say you must enter a blank, but so that's actually going to be the variable. And if I go ahead and just pull open my post form.js, and I'm just going to scroll down to where we've had these validation messages before, well, we're just going to use this variable again. So you must enter a blank. It could be title, it could be body. We don't know, but we can certainly figure that out based on what's actually missing. So that's what it's going to be in the English translation. If I go back to my French translation, again, it's going to be for required field. I'll just copy this over to make it easier on us. And then, so we'll actually do the French translation here. Wtih entre display name. Perfect. And so now what we can do is go back to our postform.js. And so this, instead of being written out here, we can actually get this from our internationalization module. So let's make sure we actually import it first. Again, we're in the postform.js, and let's import i18n from Aurelia-i18n, and we will inject it. And of course, make sure to bring it in our constructor as well. Perfect. And so within our post change method here, instead of having this kind of hard coded, we can actually use our internationalization module to get the translation. So we can say this dot i18n dot translate, and so we can use the translation for post form required field. And so yeah, this will use whenever this is actually called, it'll use the current translation for post form required field. Our display name, we don't actually want this to be title, and we don't actually want this to be body. But if we go back to our translation files, we know that we've already specified title and body in here, so we can actually just use that as well. So we could say this dot i18n dot translate post form title post form body. Okay, great. So let's see how this works. Let's go log in as Jane Doe. And if I go to new post, okay, so yeah, it still looks like we would expect it to. In fact, it looks exactly the same. So I'm going to go home. I'm going to click on French. So we're in French now. We see our nav bar is in French, and I can say create post. And if I scroll down, yeah, this looks great. This is exactly what we want. So are we done? Well, the answer is actually no. If I click on English, well, everything changes except for those messages that's still in French. And the reason being is that this is only on the post change handler. So this is not going to be triggered just because we clicked something over in our app component. So what we might want to do is integrate our event aggregator. So if I go back to my app.js file, and we see we already have our event aggregator previously used here, we can scroll down to our set locale method that we did in the previous video. And we'll have to be careful. We can't just do, well, so what we're going to want to do is say this dot event aggregator dot publish, and perhaps we'll publish something like locale changed, and we can just publish the date, the current date, just to say, hey, the locale changed. You should really refresh whatever you need to based on that locale change. But if we just did it this way, we're going to have to, we could run into easily some asynchronicity issues. So really what we should be doing is handling this, because this actually has a returns a promise here, this set locale. And so we can actually make sure that we only trigger this event after that locale has been changed. Great, so we are going to publish to locale changed whenever the locale is changed. We'll go back into our post form JS file, and instead of containing all of this good logic in post changed, let's extract this out into a different method here, like set validation. So we'll add all this logic here. And so of course we do want to call this on post change, but we also, in our constructor, perhaps we want to subscribe here. So subscribe to locale changed. And so this is receiving an updated at time, which is not going to be super important to us. But we want to make sure that whenever we know that the locale has changed, we set validation. And let's just be thorough here and say locale subscription. And then on the detached lifecycle hook, make sure that we dispose of that subscription. Okay, great. So we've used our event aggregator, and now what we're saying is that, yeah, when the post changes, we want to make sure that we set our validation up, but also if we have a locale change, then we also want to make sure that we set these messages up with the correct information from our translation files. Great, let's go back to our application, log in as Jane Doe. So what we hope is that we want these validation messages to change immediately. So let's click on Francais, and perfect, they do. So our event aggregator is firing and our application knows, hey, let's load in those new translations. Perfect. So that's exactly what we want. And now this view here is looking pretty much completely translated. In fact, I think it is. So we can feel pretty darn good about that. One last thing I wanted to do is if I go back to English and I go to the home page and I click on the French translation, well, of course, there's probably a lot we can do in here, but one thing of particular interest to us might be making sure that these date stamps are changed. And because that could be tricky, because we know that this is using a binding behavior that we're not necessarily sure on how to use translations for. So we can definitely do so. It just requires using some different Aurelia functionality, but of course they've thought of all this already. So what we can use is something called signal bindings. So we can signal to our binding behaviors that we've seen some sort of change that requires you to update. So yeah, let's make that happen. Let's go back to our app, and what we're going to do is back in this app.js file, we are going to import from Aurelia framework. So this is going to be something else from the framework. We are going to just get signal bindings. Great. And so we can use signal bindings, and within our set locales, well, we've published to the event aggregator. Let's also signal to our bindings that the locale has changed. And that's really all we need to do to tell our bindings that something has changed and you need to update. So if we then go to our date value converter, so again, let's go to value converters under the resources folder, go to dateformat.js. What we can do here is we can say that we are going to look out for the following signals that we might need to refresh these bindings, and we can look for locale changed. And that's really actually all you need to do to kind of talk amongst your app. We say, hey, let's say that we know that the locale changed, and then in our date format value converter, listen for this locale to change, and if it does, then make sure we refresh all these bindings. Okay, very cool. So what do we want to actually do when that locale has changed? Well, perhaps we want something just as simple as showing this same date format but in a different language. And so fortunately, our moment package can actually handle that pretty well. So what we do need to do though is from moment, we need to actually import the different languages that we want. So I can import moment and a locale of Canadian English. And so this is pretty important. This is actually why I named my subfolder the way I did within our translations, because it matches moment. Probably not the best reasoning. I could have kind of figured a different way around that, but so be it. That's what I did. So then we'll also want to get our French language as well from the moment package. What we'll also need is we will need our internationalization. So let's import i18n from Aurelia-i18n. And let's also get our dependency injection container from the framework. And we will inject the i18n module, and we can of course create a constructor for this class that can take the internationalization module, and we can say this dot i18n equals i18n. And great, so what we can do is in our to view here, we can pretty simply just say moment dot locale, and we're going to set our locale. Our locale could be English CA, or French, but let's just get that information from our internationalization package. So this.i18n.getLocale. Okay, so what we're doing here is basically setting the locale based on what we get from our internationalization, our translation, and we are setting the locale of our moment package here, and then just kind of like we've always been doing, we're returning the formatted moment date, but of course it's going to be in whatever language is specified. So let's go back to our application, and in English, okay, we still look good, but let's change to French, and great. So this is perfect. We are translating now. It's in French now, so that's exactly what we want. And I'm not going to take it too much further here, but we could think about the fact that this format is very much kind of an American English format, and so we might not want that. We might want to kind of extract that out, and we could either make this, you know, one of the translations that we could get from our translation files. We could also potentially, if we go into our our blog post.html element, well, perhaps what we could do is, instead of just calling date format, perhaps we could actually have a variable that comes along with our date format as well, that tells the exact format that we want our variable in. But I think we get the idea that we have quite a bit of flexibility here now. So I think that's where I'm going to stop with this kind of basic introduction to the internationalization plugin within Aurelia. As you can see, there's quite a bit we can do. If you want to practice with it, feel free to translate the sidebars and the post list views, the view post views. There's quite a bit you can translate here. Again, as I mentioned previously, probably a good idea to plan internationalization from the get-go, but retrofitting it hasn't been too bad. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to talking to you next time.